this video, I will talk about how I managed a very traumatic memory of watching my son die and moving it to a normalized memory, thus impacting my vagal tone and improving my vagal health. Please be careful if trying any of these techniques yourself. If you are really struggling, then please do not try this without a coach or therapist assisting you.
Hi everybody, my name is Justin Caffrey. Thanks for joining me on my channel. I'm a performance coach who focuses on the nervous system, the autonomic nervous system, the neuroscience, and Eastern psychology and philosophy, bringing these old worlds and new worlds together in order to help you understand how to optimize your mind and body, how to increase your performance, and how to make sure that you can live a happier and healthier life. If you haven't done so already, please come over and follow me on Instagram. I'm at Justin_Caffrey. You can come and check me out over there. I post stuff on a daily basis talking about mental health, talking about performance tips and hacks, and how we can sustain and maintain these bodies to be in the best shape they can be. And most importantly, as you're here, please do like and subscribe to this YouTube channel. It makes all the difference. Click the bell so that you get the regular updates. Don't forget, you can join my course, www.remotetribe.co.uk, where we focus on the vagus nerve, the autonomic nervous system, and techniques to help you shift and improve the way that you feel from day one. Today, I want to talk a little bit about how I approach stress, anxiety, PTSD when I'm working with a client, and what I typically see in terms of people's poor vagal response and lowered vagal tone. So it's often a recent event, a traumatic incident. It could be a job loss, a bereavement, could even be the pandemic. It could be something that impacts you emotionally, and that impact leads you to feel destabilized, out of control, anxious, stressed, and maybe leading into depression. And the way that I approach this and how I talk to my clients about this when I'm working with them is we start looking at a simple little prop like this bottle. And I explain to people that when we all arrive into this world, we have this empty bottle, and this is our capacity to deal with and manage stress. And as you move through life, the level of stress within the mind and the body is rising. And important to remember that stress is felt and kept within the body. And some people may make it to their 80s, 90s, and then they'll die, and they've never actually filled the bottle with stress. So they've made it through and there's still some capacity within it. But others will have faced challenges through their life. And it's almost like the challenges are like stones that get dropped into the water. And as the stone hits the water, the displacement of liquid means the water level rises quicker. So if you've had challenges in your childhood or your teenage years, it means that your water level is already higher than most people. And we have this capacity to manage a certain amount of stress and anxiety. We're predisposed to do that. Remember, the human being has been around for 200,000 years. We're the dominant race on this planet Earth. And the reason for that is that we've created wonderful coping and adaptive mechanisms in order to keep ourselves at the top of the food chain. However, not everybody gets to check out when there's still capacity left in the bottle. So if you've already started to be incredibly stressed and anxious by your teenager years or your 20s or 30s, then it only takes the next event, the next emotional impact, that means the water level rises right up to the top. And when it rises right up to the top, you feel out of control. Making decisions can be hard. It feels difficult to orientate yourself, and you often feel the voice and the noise, the self-talk, really kind of dials up at that stage, and it's a very stressful time in terms of your engagement. So the approach that I take is, in essence, looking at how can we put our hand into this bottle and take some of these stones out so that we bring some relief and we drop this water level. Because as we drop the water level, we create spaciousness in the mind and the body, and the spaciousness gives us the capacity to look up with some clarity, with some foresight, and with some understanding of life, and adapt and change to our surroundings. Without that, life is out of control. One of the big contributing factors to this is my mentor, Dr. Pradeep Chadha, and his approach, which is called Subjective Emotive Brief Therapy. And I use these techniques when I'm working with people on a one-to-one basis to help create the spaciousness. If I'm coaching people in terms of leadership and dynamic capacity to build resilient mindsets to run and lead their businesses and global organizations, we look first at what are the things that we can do in order to create the spaciousness, because within that spaciousness you have a greater capacity to be in flow state. And what Dr. Chadha achieved was an understanding as to how we can reorientate memories in the mind and file them differently. And let me explain. If we go back 500 years, it wouldn't be unusual that we could be under significant attack in terms of our physical threat level on a regular basis. And equally, it wouldn't be unusual that you would encounter more of your family dying within your lifetime, and it could happen very early on. You could see your children die. You could even see a war, a village, and one village attacking another, and as a consequence you could see your family killed. Now, the way that the human being is set up, we have kind of three prime directives: seek food, seek shelter, and procreate. And that's what we're predisposed to be able to do, and that's ultimately how we make sure that this human race, which is on this planet for 200,000 years, is able to continue on. And in that vein, what would happen is, when we would see something terrible happening in our lives, the brain and the nervous system had a capacity to realize that that event was too traumatic to revisit again, so it would close it down and send it off into the deeper recesses of our subconscious memory. We'd only ever re-interact with it again if the nervous system felt like there was another threat that looked similar to the one that was filed back here. So we would get these kind of flashbacks where we would see these moments appear and then disappear again. And that worked well because it would allow the human beings at that time to then go and mate with another human and again procreate and keep the human race growing. However, the challenges in the 21st century is that this 200,000-year-old nervous system still files away anything that it believes to be a threat as if it is an actual threat to life. And to give you some context on this, when, for some of you who may know my story already, my son died just before his first birthday, Joshua. And I witnessed him dying. He died in my wife's arms, and that was a traumatic moment. And my mind then saw the moment and filed it away. And for the next 2 or 3 years, I would only ever see it again in fleeting moments when something else would prompt fear and my anxiety levels would rise and my mind would flash up this traumatic memory. And it wasn't constructive because there was nothing that I could do in the present moment that would change the fact that my son had died. But the fact that my son had died was actually impacting the present moment. So something had to give. Now, before I went into therapy and before I trained myself in this coaching and therapeutic modality, I needed to deal with my own issues. So we worked on the fact that we needed to change that memory of Joshua and his final moments into a memory that I could access in a normal run of remembering a vacation a few years ago or last Christmas celebration or whatever else. So we use a technique called the wiper technique. And the wiper is just simply this idea of watching an event and wiping it forward and backward and forward and backward. And we do this in a very safe, contained space where the client is working with me with their eyes closed. And we're accessing these challenging memories. And they may be memories going right back to childhood. It may be an incident where you were bullied in school and, this character has remained prevalent in your mind. And what we're really looking at is when you ask somebody to cast your mind back across their life, to just call out the incidents where they feel that they've been threatened, abused, physically assaulted, mentally assaulted, sexually assaulted by another party. And we compile a list of all these events. And then we go and we take one of those events. So for the purpose of this, I'll continue on with that idea of Joshua, my son, and his last moments. So when we would work on this basis, we would extract that memory of Joshua And I would see him in those last moments and see him draw his last breath. Now that would immediately bring huge physical sensations within my body because I'm literally, viscerally remembering that feeling. It's almost like I'm right back in that moment. But in session then, what would happen is I would then, with my eyes closed, be asked to look at that timeline all the way through from the start, right up to the present, and then backwards again, and then right up to the present, and then backwards again, and then right up to the present. So I keep looking at that timeline forwards and backwards and forwards and backwards. What's happening is my nervous system and my brain are starting to familiarize themselves with that whole event. And at various times during this, and this is a lengthy process, it can take 45, 50 minutes to just tackle an event, but it's very productive. And at times we'll do the wiper process and we might look through it 7 or 8 times, and then we'll stop, and then I'll be asking the person, how do you feel and what do you notice? And they'll speak about how they feel and what they notice. And again, if I talk about my own experience rather than me speaking about another client, in that time when I did this for the first time 8 years ago, I started to, first of all, feel and notice the reality of remembering that moment of his death and the pain and torment that was attached to it. But the more I started to look at it and see it forwards and backwards and forwards and backwards with my eyes closed, visualizing it in my head, the more I started to take the power away from that moment. It's almost like if I watch a movie over and over and over again, it just becomes very familiar and less interesting to me. And in the same way, as you watch this over and over again, it becomes familiar to the nervous system and to the mind, and it becomes less reactionary to the body. So as I would start to look at it, and as we went through different exercises during that period, I started to feel that the power of the impact of what I was seeing was diminishing greatly. And we evolve that even further because we then bring it to the point where we're then calling for the emotion. So we start to understand the emotion. So as the event becomes easier and simpler to notice, for me, what happens in that situation was I started to notice, oh, I remember other things leading up to Joshua's death that weren't traumatic. So I'm moving that really traumatic memory slightly out of the way, and I'm now starting to see good memories, happy memories, good times. I can remember the 11 months where there was positive family interaction around Joshua. So I've just got over that hurdle of the traumatic memory, and the body is starting to see it and feel it a bit differently. And then it gets really interesting because then we deal with the emotions that are still being held and retained within the body. So for me, as the father of a child who died before his first birthday, there was guilt. There was guilt attached to, could I not have done more for him? Did I not have an opportunity to get better medical care? We were on vacation when Joshua was born, and was that my fault for being on vacation? So you have all of these questions, all the self-talk analysis that comes in. So I knew I carried a huge amount of guilt for Joshua's death. And whether it's logical or not is irrelevant. It's about what is programmed within my body. So I need to deal with the potentially illogical guilt that I'm having in relation to Joshua's death. But if I don't deal with it, it will still be retained within the body. So we then use a process of calling forward a visualization. And we call forward a visualization in terms of the person that you need to interact with. So even in this situation, this is with an 11-month-old child. So with my eyes closed, I'm visualizing this child and I'm bringing forth this vision of being able to see him again. And we create a safe, contained environment where I'm able to speak to him. And when I'm speaking to him, I'm talking to him about the fact that, and this is all in the mind now, when I say speaking to him, it all happens in the mind, it's not actually vocalized. But as I visualize him, I'm able to communicate with him how I feel now in the present moment, but what I feel in terms of how maybe I think I let him down at that time in his life, how I think I could have done things differently, A, B, and C. And I allow that conversation to happen with him. And during that interaction, we're looking at facial expressions with the other person, which in this situation is a baby. But bizarrely, the way that the subconscious operates and the way that the nervous system operates, the baby becomes the mirror image of my emotions. So as I communicate and speak how I feel, I'm transferring them to another person, even though it's virtual and even though it's in my mind. And within that transfer, what happens is I'm letting go and I'm speaking to that person that I've hurt or wronged. And that can be, when we do this in session, it could be a parent, a grandparent, an uncle, it could be a former boss, a former lover, a former friend, somebody who bullied you in school. So the spectre in terms of who this could be is quite significant. But what happens is, as you are having that conversation and letting go, you are releasing so much from the body. And most importantly, what we do then is we're looking at the person's interaction as we speak how we feel. And if this is in the case where it's a school bully, we'll often allow the person to physically take hold of that person who's bullied them when maybe they were 10 or 11 and be able to shake them and make them smaller and feel smaller and then let their anger out so that they get a sense of control and a sense of safety in terms of, I am back in the chair here. It's not the power being left with that other person. And we finish these sessions, as I did with Joshua, with forgiveness. And forgiveness usually works in two ways. It's one, seeking forgiveness from the person who you may have wronged. And if that was the school bully, it may be after you've really let fly with them in terms of how they've made you feel and physically let all your anger out in that session. And then once that's done, we then connect into a sense of heart, a really deep sense of forgiveness. So in my situation, I needed to seek forgiveness for Joshua for not being able to save his life. Now, of course, he was chronically ill and I couldn't save his life, but that doesn't matter in terms of how my mind perceived it. So by going in and seeking his forgiveness, I start to release what's holding on to me and prohibiting me from living my life in the present. So I would seek his forgiveness and then I would see his facial expression changing and it would bring me a release. Or it could be, dealing with the school bully. After you've had your opportunity to physically let it out, the pain and anger towards that person, you then choose to forgive them yourself. So you find that capacity in your heart. And again, this is all done within the mind and in a session. But you find that capacity in your heart to forgive them and let them go. And that, of course, might sound hard for people to do. But if you don't let go, you continue to hold on. And continuing to hold on is attachment. And through attachment, we have suffering. So when I work with people, it's about bringing this to the point where we're looking for a big revelation here. We are going to be letting go of attachment. We're going to be letting go of suffering. And we're going to be moving this mind and body to a level where it's time to change. So when we go through the acceptance, we move up an additional level. We've done the wiper technique to really kind of allow the mind and body to see the memory so many times over and over again, it stops being that traumatic reoccurrence. And then we find the forgiveness, and that might be forgiveness for yourself, forgiveness for another. And then we're closing off that situation. And this is a really powerful technique. And it's really helpful when I work with people who are struggling. Maybe the bottle feels a little bit full. Maybe the last few years have brought them to the point where they're stressed and they're high performance. They might be in a position of leadership. They may be a professional athlete or a politician. And there's an expectation that they're always performing at a high level. So we work together in confidence to make sure that we create the spaciousness. We give them the capacity to re-engage, and ultimately we bring them back to flow state. But the key message really from this video is that if things are inhibiting your life today, but they've happened in the past, then it's time to give consideration to the fact that you can change the relationship with those memories. But remember that the body is holding on to the pain. So we have cognitive thought, and then we have physically held trauma and pain. So it requires working with somebody who can help you with the mind, the body, the memory, and the capacity to move and shift that memory from that traumatized subconscious point of the brain into the regular memory, so that you just feel like it's a memory like any other in the past. It's not there to inhibit you and inhibit your growth in this moment. I've staggered this video so that it's a snapshot and you can enjoy it over the next few weeks and get a little bit each week. It's a long talk and I don't want to really hit you with a huge amount of information at one go. So please watch them in sequence, and I hope it's able to help you in some way.